and welcome to Everyday Tarot, your daily dive into the divine wisdom of the tarot. I'm your host, Camille A. Saunders, and today we'll be entering season 2 of my podcast and talking all about the major arcana tarot cards. Today I'll be talking about the Magician. Whether you're a seasoned tarot reader or just starting to explore, this podcast offers daily insights, intuitive messages, and practical advice drawn from the cards. Each episode is designed to help you connect with your inner wisdom, find clarity in your decisions, and tap into the energy of the universe. Tune in every day, Monday through Friday, for fresh perspectives and empowering guidance from the tarot as interpreted by me. I have some announcements today. So I created a Patreon, which is the best way right now to get in touch with me. The link will be in the show notes there. Right now, there are 2 different tiers. One is the lovers of the podcast at $6.66 a month. This is to be a proud supporter of the podcast. You get early access to all the upcoming podcast episode topics, and you're able to request any future topics as well. And then the other tier I have right now is the Witch Bitch tier, which is $33.33 a month with a 7-day free trial. And the big things for those, you'll get everything included with the other tier. And in addition to that, you'll get monthly tarot hangouts. I'll be hosting a hangout on video once a month. Any members can join me from the Witch Bitch level to chat about anything. We'll try to keep the conversations at least partially focused on tarot, but we'll see where we go with that. And then you'll also get any digital downloads that I have already and any I create related to the podcast. So you'll get the guides I already have, the grief meditation, and the how to actually feel your feelings guide. And you'll get any everyday tarot related guides I create in the future, all included with your membership. All right, so that's it for announcements today. And again, link for the Patreon will be in the show notes below the episode. All right, and you can always go to my website, CamilleASaunders.com/everydaytarot to find any of the images that I talk about today related to the cards or any of the other information and links. All right, so into our main discussion now. So again, welcome to season 2 of the podcast. The first season, I introduced tarot through talking about oracle versus tarot cards, myths of tarot, how to find a deck, reading for yourself, reading for others, and so much more. In season 2, we're going through the first 13 cards of the major arcana, 1 per episode. So today I'll be talking about the Magician. So the Magician is, the number associated with it is 1. We talked about last episode that the Fool is considered the 0 number associated with it. So some of the depictions that we often see of the Magician, often depicted as a person with one hand up and one down. In my Anima Mundi deck, they depict the Magician as an owl butterfly, which is one of those that kind of looks like it has eyes on its wings, probably why it's called an owl butterfly. They also show often an infinity symbol, and symbols for the 4 suits are often included in this card as well. And both of the cards that I'm sharing today, looking at, that depict this, they both have all 4 symbols of the future suits also in the photo. So in the Goddess of Love tarot deck, the Magician is called the Enchantress. So this deck takes some of the traditional interpretations and changes some of the names of them. So the goddess depicted in this card in the Goddess of Love tarot deck is Kurukula. Kurukula is a dakini of magic, enchantment, and enlightenment. In Tantric Buddhist tradition, the dakinis are expressions of the erotic divine feminine in her role of wisdom keeper. Dakinis aren't technically goddesses, but they can be worked with as deities and guides. So again, if you think about the look of the card, sort of traditionally, often depicted as sort of like a figure, again, sometimes hand up or hand down. On this particular card, the Kurukula is depicted sort of floating in the air with a bow and arrow and roses. And then again, she's shown with the 4 suits, and there's a little bit of interpretation here, but they're seen with a rose, a heptagram, a chalice or a cup, and a sword. And so the rose would be sort of equal to like the wands. Often the heptagram would be related to pentacles. The chalice is like a cup, and then the dagger with swords. So let's get into some of the meanings of the magician card. So again, you can think of a literal magician, so someone who can create things at will, using willpower. Um, from the Anima Mundi deck, one of the descriptions in the guidebook says you have everything you need to achieve your goals: ambition, skills, and resources. Use those things to create what you want in life. So you're in charge of your own reality. You can make it happen. Again, it's sort of this like creation, creating things at will, maybe making things show up out of thin air. You think of a magician, taking action, resourcefulness, so sort of using what you have and being kind of clever about that. Other sort of themes or topics associated with a magician are powerful. Again, thinking of a magician, like magic can be a very powerful tool or weapon. There's that creation or creative energy in general. And then also this card's associated with the number 1. So again, the first number of the tarot is 0, and that's associated with the Fool, which is not technically a number. 0 is the absence of something, the void. So this one's associated with the number 1, and pointing out that sort of seeing the angel number 1 or 1111 or 1111 is often seen as an encouragement to embrace new opportunities, plant new seeds, take new actions. So a lot of newness, and again, sort of like that creation energy, planting seeds, right? That's sort of, you have the hope and faith that when you plant things that in the future something will come of it. Other topics associated with the magician are leadership. Again, when it's often depicted, they're standing in a very sturdy position. They look like they know what they're talking about. They have different objects in their hands often, and they're sort of leading the way. Maybe right only for themselves, but also there is this aspect of the magician around maybe leading the way in larger ways as well for other people. So again, in the Goddess of Love tarot deck that I love to use, Kirikula, it talks about your attachments and desires to magnetize you towards conditions and experiences that help you find and follow your purpose. So that can be with sexuality, with beauty, and love as part of the spiritual path. Just as the enchantress uses the wand, chalice, swords, and pentacles as the magical weapons of choice, Kurukula uses the tool of the erotic. So this card embodies the idea that desires are sacred and a method of evolution and spiritual growth. So there's really this idea that the power is within you, and whatever you have drawn in is meant to be in your life as a teaching of the most sacred order. And that all comes from the tarot deck description book that goes with the Goddess of Love tarot deck, by Gabriela Herstick and Julia Popesco. And any decks that I talk about are always linked in the show notes below. All right, so let's dive in and see what the cards have to say today. And the way I'm doing this as we go through the major arcana is thinking about sort of pulling the theme from the card we're talking about today and seeing how we might apply that as it relates to our own lives. So from this card, I pull this sense of like leadership. Where should I take charge of my own life? And in the Goddess of Love tarot deck, they often have a journal prompt for each card that's listed, as well as some other things like affirmations, sometimes rituals. So in this, for this particular card, the prompt was, what am I longing for in love and sex, and how can I see this as part of my spiritual practice? So again, these are two different types of things that we can be thinking about as I pull this card. All right, so this is fascinating. So the first card I pulled was the Star reversed, which is the same card I pulled yesterday in the Fool episode. So I actually pulled another card, and then I pulled the Fool reversed. This is the way the tarot sort of can feel very fortuitous sometimes. So again, I was sort of like, okay, what if we get a different idea? So I pulled a third card and we got the Page of Wands reversed. So all of the cards I pulled today are reversed. And yeah, let's go into some of what I think I should pull from this. So where should I take charge of my own life? What am I longing for? So the star, is full of hope, joy, lightheartedness, free flowing love, optimistic, and explorer. Again, the image on this particular deck and card is of like an astronomer out in space. But when we look at it reverse, sometimes it's an idea of feeling lost or a promise or hope may be false. So maybe there's this feeling, if we, from pulling three cards, often one of the things that I look at is sort of a past, present, future spread. So we'll say that maybe, okay, the star reversed is maybe part of the past. Maybe we used to really, again, feel lost. There was like this promise or hope. And that's behind us now. And we're sort of looking towards, okay, where are we at in the present? So the second card I pulled was the Fool reversed. So the Fool is generally, again, sort of the beginning of the journey. Uh, Blissfully unaware you're stepping off a cliff. But when we think about it reversed, there is this sort of idea of maybe getting stuck in old habits or patterns of thought, maybe sort of overthinking, being afraid of the unknown. And it says, conversely, do not be overly reckless or foolhardy, trampling on yourself or others. So I'm sort of taking that as in the present right now. So maybe again, there was this old pattern of maybe getting stuck. You're getting stuck in the old patterns of thought, maybe being afraid of the unknown. I started my Patreon today and sort of set that up. So maybe there is this aspect of like, okay, maybe there's a little bit too much overthinking around that, right? Maybe I should just go and publish, which is what I did today before doing this episode, and just not being overly reckless or foolhardy, but sort of just thinking about what are some of those old patterns that I might sometimes get wrapped up in, and where do I want to go from here? So when we look at the present, I pulled the Page of Wands reversed. So the Page of Wands is often this sort of inspiration. On this particular card, there's a woman with, as it says in the guidebook, bright-eyed, inspired, and wears a flame insignia on her chest. So sort of that like creating new things. Her hair is also fire-like. Think of your creative spirit as a fire, therefore it needs fuel, like wood. Throw some wood on your fire. What inspires you and gets you all worked up? Go get more of that. It says, as a page, this card can also signify a messenger, the arrival of news. So again, if we look at sort of the reverse of this, and again, if we think of this as sort of maybe the things we should keep in mind for the future, it says you may be hitting stumbling blocks in your creative ventures. The projects you've decided to take on may be more difficult than you expected. You may not believe you are a creative person or an artist. Don't let your self-talk define who you are or aren't. So sort of have, right, there's still that a bit of like optimism. Maybe today or recently, your creativity has felt blocked. Maybe you've had to get a little more down in the details than you had hoped, or something just took a little longer. Maybe there's this like belief coming up of like, oh, I'm not creative enough. Oh, I'm not an artist. That's not something I do. Or, oh, like I can't really call myself that thing. And so it says, don't let your self talk define who you are or aren't, right? You get to decide those things. You get to decide how you're moving into the future. You get to decide if you're a creative person and an artist. And when you tell yourself that you're not, sometimes we can also believe that. So, right, with this Page of Wands, there's this creative, this artistic energy, this fire energy. So maybe, right, we're really wanting some creativity right now, but we're feeling slow or lethargic. So how can you feed that creativity? Today I went and worked at a cafe for a couple hours as I was working on scripting out some of the podcast episodes and just being in a new environment with some new coffee and new snacks, right? Sometimes that can just inspire us or just have us work in a slightly different way than normal. And as I said before, links for the tarot decks that I use will always be in the show notes and on my website if you like to look at them or purchase them. The cards that I pulled today are from the Sasurabito Tarot deck by Stasia Burrington. And thanks so much for joining me today on Everyday Tarot. Just as a reminder, the podcast will come out daily, Monday through Friday for all of 2025. All right, see you soon. Bye bye.